47,000 tech jobs were cut in just one quarter. Not over a year, not across a long cycle, just a few months. And if you're in tech right now, this probably doesn't feel surprising anymore. It's not shocking news. It's more like a pattern you've started to notice. Fewer open roles, hiring freezes that don't get announced publicly, teams getting smaller, even when performance is strong. For a lot of professionals, the feeling isn't panic. It's something quieter. Uncertainty. You're still employed. Things still look stable on the surface. But there's a growing question in the background. If another round happens, where do I stand? Because what used to feel like a secure industry doesn't feel as predictable anymore. And here's the part most people are missing. This isn't just about layoffs. Because while those 47,000 jobs were being cut, hiring didn't stop. It just moved. The question is, where? To understand what's happening, you have to zoom out. Because that 47,000 number isn't an isolated spike. In the first few months of 2026 alone, tech companies globally announced more than 45,000 layoffs. And about 68% of those cuts came from US-based companies. So this isn't something happening somewhere else. It's happening in the core of the tech market. And it's happening across different types of companies. Amazon led workforce reductions with around 16,000 corporate job cuts. Block reduced roughly 40% of its workforce. That's over 4,000 employees in a single strategic shift. Meta cut about 10% of its Reality Labs division, roughly 1,500 roles, as it redirected resources. And this isn't limited to the US. In Europe, Ericsson laid off 1,600 workers. ASML reduced its workforce by around 1,700 employees. Different regions, different business models, same direction. And when you stack this on top of what already happened, 2025 saw nearly 245,000 tech jobs cut globally. So what you're seeing now isn't the beginning. It's a continuation. And that's where the shift in perception starts. Because layoffs used to feel like isolated events. Now they feel recurring. Not constant, but predictable enough that people start thinking ahead. Even if things are fine right now. Even if your role feels secure. The environment around you is changing. And that's usually what people respond to first. Not the layoff itself, but the growing sense that it could happen. So what's actually behind this? Because these cuts aren't random. They're deliberate. And they're being driven by a few very specific shifts. The first one is artificial intelligence. Roughly 20% of the layoffs in early 2026, about 9,200 roles, were directly tied to AI implementation and restructuring. And that number is likely conservative, because in many cases, AI isn't listed as the reason. But it's still influencing the decision. What's changing is how work gets done. Tasks that used to require multiple people can now be handled by smaller teams, sometimes much smaller. So companies are starting to restructure around that reality, not by eliminating entire departments, but by reducing how many people they need to operate. You can see this clearly in how companies are repositioning themselves. Block cut around 40% of its workforce while shifting toward AI-assisted development. Meta reduced parts of its business to focus more heavily on AI research and infrastructure. This isn't just cost-cutting, it's reallocation. The second driver is efficiency pressure. For years, growth was the priority. Now it's productivity. Doing more with fewer people. Higher output per employee. Leaner teams. And that changes hiring behavior. Because instead of expanding teams, companies are optimizing them, which means fewer openings, even when business is stable. And the third shift is strategic focus. Companies are moving resources toward areas they believe will define the next phase of growth. AI, infrastructure, systems that scale. And moving into those areas often means pulling resources from somewhere else, which is where the cuts happen. So when you combine all three, AI adoption, efficiency pressure, and strategic shifts, you get a very different kind of job market. One where roles aren't just disappearing, they're being redesigned. And that's why this feels different. Because even if you're not affected today, you can see the direction things are moving. And once that becomes clear, it's hard to ignore. But here's the part most people haven't fully processed yet. While roles are being reduced in one area, they're expanding in another. Just not in the places most people are looking. So if all you look at is layoffs, it's easy to come to one conclusion: that opportunities are shrinking, that the market is getting worse. that it's becoming harder everywhere. But that's not entirely accurate, because hiring hasn't stopped. It's shifted, and this is where the situation becomes less obvious. Most professionals track what's happening inside tech companies, tech roles, tech job boards. So when hiring slows there, it feels like the entire market is slowing. But outside of that bubble, a different trend is playing out. Companies are still hiring. In some cases, they're struggling to hire fast enough. But they're not always looking for the same profiles or advertising in the same places. And that creates a disconnect. Because from one perspective, things look like they're contracting. From another, they're expanding at the same time. So the issue isn't that opportunities don't exist. It's that they've moved outside of where most people are focused. And if you're only looking in one direction, you miss what's happening everywhere else. Just a quick reminder, check ReSkila.com to learn how we can help you for free to find your next successful career path. Again, go to ReSkila.com for details. Link in the description below. Now, let's get back to the video. One of the clearest areas where this shift is happening is energy, and not in a small way. In the US alone, the clean energy economy employs nearly 3.6 million people. That's already a massive workforce, and it's still growing. Globally, the World Economic Forum projects that the transition to cleaner energy could create 170 million new jobs by 2030. At the same time, around 92 million roles are expected to be displaced, which tells you something important. This isn't just growth, it's redistribution, jobs moving from one sector into another. And the scale of that shift is significant. The global power industry alone will need between 450,000 and 1.5 million additional engineers by 2030. That's not a small hiring gap. That's a structural shortage. And it's already starting to show. The International Energy Agency estimates that the workforce entering the energy sector needs to increase by around 40% by 2030 just to keep up with demand. So while one industry is reducing headcount, another is struggling to find enough people. And that gap is where the opportunity starts to form. So, why is this happening now? Why energy? The answer is, well, AI. But not in the way most people think. AI doesn't just affect software jobs. It creates massive demand for infrastructure, data centers, power systems, grid stability, electricity supply, and all of that requires energy. A lot of it. In the US, electricity demand is now expected to grow by around 1% to 2% annually. That might sound small, but at scale, it's significant. And in some regions, the growth is much more aggressive. In Texas, electricity demand is projected to increase by nearly 10% annually through 2027, driven largely by data centers and industrial expansion. And this demand isn't theoretical. It's already being backed by major investments. The U.S. Department of Energy launched a $1 billion partnership with AMD to build new supercomputers. Constellation Energy secured a $1 billion federal loan to restart a nuclear power plant, with a long-term agreement supporting Microsoft. Vistra signed 20-year agreements to supply over 2,600 megawatts of nuclear energy for Meta's operations. These are long-term commitments, which means the demand behind them is long-term too. And here's where it connects back to jobs. The rapid expansion of AI infrastructure could leave up to 340,000 data center positions unfilled by the end of 2026. At the same time, more than 50% of data center operators already report struggling to find qualified candidates. So while AI is reducing some roles in tech, it's creating pressure somewhere else. In physical infrastructure, in energy systems, in the layers that actually support everything digital. This is where it becomes relevant to you, because the assumption most people make is, these are completely different industries, different skills, different backgrounds, different career paths. But that's not entirely true. A lot of the roles being created require the same core capabilities: systems thinking, data handling, automation, security. For example, SCADA engineers who work on control systems connecting software to physical infrastructure earn around $79,000 on average in the US. Automation engineers working across both software and industrial systems typically earn between $85,000 and $105,000. Data center project managers, especially in high-growth regions like Texas, can earn anywhere from $100,000 to over $175,000 per year. These are not entry-level roles, and they're not niche either. They're becoming increasingly central because modern energy systems are no longer purely mechanical. They're digital, connected, data-driven, and that creates overlap. The challenge isn't qualification, it's visibility. Most tech professionals never see these roles. They're not positioned in the same way. They don't appear in the same feeds. So the connection is never made. Meanwhile, companies in these sectors are actively trying to hire and struggling to fill positions, which creates a rare situation where demand exists, but supply isn't aligning with it. So when you step back and look at the full picture, this isn't just a story about layoffs, and it's not just a story about growth. It's a story about movement, roles being reduced in one area and expanded in another. And for most people, the uncertainty comes from not knowing where they stand in that shift, not knowing what options they actually have, or how close they might already be to something else. Because in many cases, the gap isn't as big as it seems. It's not about leaving tech behind. It's about understanding where your skills can apply beyond it. So instead of guessing, I built something simple, a short tool that maps your current skills to roles where demand is actively growing. It takes a few minutes, and it gives you a clear sense of where you fit, what options you have, and what your next step could look like. No assumptions, no pressure, just clarity. If you want to check it out, you'll find it in the description.